All right, so now I have a really wonderful thing to do. I get to introduce our graduation speaker. And I was looking at my watch and I was thinking, let's see, how long have I known this person personally? And it's just a little more than 24 hours. And yet somehow I feel like I've known him all my life. And I won't bore you with all of his accolades. You can look them up online. He's world famous Hay House author, travels all around the country. He's a Course in Miracles teacher. He's been on with Oprah, and on and on and on it goes. But what I'd like to say is that this is somebody who speaks our language. This is somebody who has gotten the same levels of insights that we have worked so hard to get ourselves. This is somebody who I have absolutely no doubt going forward is and will continue to be part of our USM family. So please join me in welcoming Robert Holden.
Wow. My goodness. In Britain, if we get emotional twice in the same year, that's considered borderline. Wow, what an afternoon. How amazing. God, so beautiful. You look beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and I guess I just want to congratulate the Chancellor and the Vice-Chancellor, congratulate Ron and Mary, congratulate the trustees, congratulate the admin and the staff, congratulate the faculty, and of course, ladies and gentlemen, just to congratulate you. Very, very well done. Maybe one more round of applause, everybody. So look, I was 18 years old, and I set off for an adventure to Middle England. I went to a place called Birmingham, which was 3 hours away from my little village called Littleton. I wondered if I would ever come back. And I went to study psychology. I took a course where there were modules on psychology and philosophy and linguistics and sociology. And let's just say it was an interesting course. A course I was glad to have taken, but honestly, there was something missing. The 3 years were essentially a 3-year study of suffering. Year 1 was basic suffering. Year 2 was more advanced suffering. And Year 3 was really complicated suffering. Deep, deep, deep suffering. And in that time, we only had one lecture on happiness. Imagine if you'd missed it. Are you serious? There was a lecture on happiness? Yeah, I'm afraid there was, yeah. Wow. See, you'd never have known that it was going to be a lecture on happiness because it was called subjective well-being. Subjective well-being is very clever. It's where you get to say you're happy and the psychologist gets to say, let's see about that. Just because you say you are, it doesn't mean you are. It could be a defense mechanism. So there was something missing. There was no happiness. And the lecture was terrible. It was depressing and awful. And it was shocking. And at the same time, I want you to know, I did enjoy the curriculum. I actually was an A-grade student, which for me was a change, because at school I was a C-grade student. But as soon as we started to study suffering, I started to get A's in everything. So this was good for me. It wasn't that I was against suffering. And this is actually the God-honest truth, this bit, because I know this will sound like a joke, but I got A's for everything. I got an A- for only one subject. And it's, I think, the worst subject you could get an A- for, bearing in mind I got A's for everything else. I got an A- for paranoia. How bad is that? I'm thinking to myself, well, why didn't they give me an A? I mean, the paper was as good as all the other papers. Maybe they just don't want a straight A student. Maybe that's what it is. I guess we'll never know. So there was no happiness. There was also no love. We had one lecture on interpersonal attraction theory. And I remember asking my faculty, my lecturers, are we talking about love? And they wouldn't commit. They wouldn't commit. And I remember one Christmas sending all of the faculty, all of the lecturers, Christmas cards, which I signed with lots of interpersonal attraction from Robert Holden. See, we didn't study love, we studied Freud. And, and Freud said something that I have remembered all the way up until this day and have quoted many, many times. Because Freud said, in the final analysis, in order not to fall ill, we must learn to love. And yet, there was no love in our curriculum. We had no happiness, we had no love, and we had no soul. We had lots of ology, but not much psyche. There wasn't much of the psychology in our, if you like, the psyche in our own curriculum. And as Ron and Mary will have taught you, and you know so well, that word psyche means soul, breath of life. And yet here we were with no soul in our curriculum. Now, on that program, I met my first spiritual teacher. This man was a fellow student. He wasn't on the faculty at all. He was a fellow student. He was a mature student. The lecturers described him as a mature student because he was 24 years old and we were all 18 years old. So he was ancient and we were young. And he sat at the back of the class, and he was always the last in and he was always the first out. To give you a visual of this man, he was an Indian man, but he was the spitting image of Danny DeVito. And I mean that, the spitting image of Danny DeVito. And I was curious about this man. I wanted to get to know him, but even weeks into this program, I still hadn't spoken to him. None of us had. And one day I made up my mind, I'm going to speak to him. This would have been about maybe 12 weeks into the program. So the bell went for the end of class, and he went off as normal, and I ran after him. And I managed to catch up with him, and I hadn't planned what I was going to say. And I said something really odd and silly, like, do you come here often? Which is just ridiculous. But I did, something like that. And then I said, what made you choose this course? And he looked me in the eye, and he said, well, I came to meet you. That's quite something. I had no idea what to say. So I simply said, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you around. But he was my first spiritual teacher. He was a yogi. He was the one who introduced me to the great texts, to the Upanishads and the Gita and the Dhammapada and the autobiography of a yogi. He was the one who introduced me to the Christian mystics. He was the one who introduced me to so many great spiritual traditions. He introduced me to my first meditation exercise, where I would be looking at a candle flame for hours on end while Starsky and Hutch was on, trying to make the right choice. He was the one who set me on my journey, and he was the one who put some soul into a curriculum back then. And he was the one who introduced me to the idea, I think, that you can have such a thing as a soul-centered education. When I began my practice as a psychotherapist, those early days, I had a one-to-one practice, and I also had created a clinic on our National Health Service. It was a clinic called Stress Busters. And honestly, in those early days, I'd say I tried hard. I did quite well, but not very well. Most of the people that I was able to help, the help was temporary. I could help them change their thoughts, but just for a while. Just for a while before another problem arose. Another addiction, another anxiety disorder, another bad relationship, another bout of depression. The help was always temporary. There was something missing in there. My problem, I believe, was that when people came to see me, I was looking for a diagnosis. If you had come to see me back then for one-to-one work, you'd have found that I was trained to spot the problem you had, that you were going to tell me about. We call that the presenting problem. I was also trained to spot the problem you had that you were going to tell me about a little bit later. You know, the real problem. And I was also trained to spot the problem you had that you didn't even know you had yet. It was a much deeper problem, a super-duper problem. And that was there for us to explore as well. And I think whilst I focused on the diagnosing, I lost sight of the whole picture. And I lost sight, in a way, if you like, of the people that I was truly trying to help. And I wasn't the only one doing this. This was, and remains to be in many ways, the great fad of the psychology traditions. You know, there is this manual, the DSM, which is in many ways, I think, representative of our age of diagnostic excess. When the DSM was first created, it listed back in, well, the second edition, this would be in 1968, there were 90 pages of diagnoses. A few short years later, in the fourth edition, there were over 900 pages of diagnoses. In the most recent edition of this Bible of wrongness, there is even more diagnoses. And some of those diagnoses, I think, are a great concern. The fact that they've even been labeled as diagnoses. For instance, grief is diagnosed as an illness. Grief is not an illness. Grief is how we honor the passing of our loved ones. And it's how we make sense of our lives and commit to the rest of our lives. There are more diagnoses that are now labeled as incurable than ever before. Perhaps we need a diagnosis for the people who like to diagnose everything. There has to be a place for diagnosis, and it's important, and it will have been part of your training. But it doesn't work if we lose sight of the whole person. Somewhere along the line, I was able to balance out that psychology training with a spirituality, just like you have been doing. I began to see that there was another way of working. When I stopped looking for the diagnosis in people, something wonderful happened. I saw them. I saw them. I saw who they really are. I saw their wholeness. And I was able to say with absolute certainty to these people, there is nothing wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with you. Yes, you may have had a terrible childhood, but there is nothing wrong with you. Yes, you may be suffering from psychology, but there is nothing wrong with you. Yes, your personality may be auditioning for a part in high anxiety, but there is nothing wrong with the essence of who you are. Yes, your mother may have played the martyr and your father may have failed his emotional intelligence exam, but still there is nothing wrong with you. Yes, you may have made mistakes. Yes, you may have regrets, but there is still nothing wrong with you. Yes, you have a story. Let's honor that story, but let's remember there is nothing wrong with you. Along the way, I learned that the only act of healing, really, is to accept that there is nothing wrong with the essence of who we are. It's to forgive ourselves for all of those dark nights, classically described as the dark nights of the soul. They are not. They are dark nights of the ego. We forgive ourselves for those dark nights, and we remember our wholeness along the way. Fast forward a few years, and I'm writing a book called Shift Happens, with an F, by the way, just in case you didn't hear it right. Shift Happens. And another experience happens to me, which I take as another big moment in my journey towards a more integrated psycho-spiritual approach to the healing arts. I'm writing this book called Shift Happens, and I'm asked by an organization in the UK, the Royal National Institute for the Blind, to give a talk to some teenagers, a talk about happiness. And these teenagers are like every other group of teenagers you could imagine, fun, boisterous, rebellious, fidgety, and blind. We had a great time. At the end of the program, the short program just for an afternoon, one of the people stayed behind. One of the young boys stayed behind. And he came up to me and he started to talk to me for a while, and then I knew it was just chit-chat. He wanted to get to something, and eventually he just said, I have a question for you, and I wonder if you might be able to answer it for me. It's a question I have never, ever asked anybody before, and I have a feeling you might be able to help me. I sensed a sense of occasion, and together we took a walk out of the classroom and walked around a soccer pitch for a couple of laps, more chit-chat, and then eventually he stopped and he said, I think I'm ready to ask you the question. And so I got ready, but I wasn't ready, because here was the question. He said, I have been blind since birth, and I've never seen myself. I'd like to know, am I beautiful? Am I beautiful? And in that moment, you can imagine, I tried to do everything I could to assure him just how beautiful he is. And when I did that, he then said, how beautiful? That was another conversation too. But as I talked with him, I realized that, you know that old adage, the one about, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear? You know it works the other way around, don't you, as well? When the teacher is ready, the student will appear. And it works just as well that way around. And I felt here was a young boy called Peter who was showing me yet again that there was more work for me to do. And part of the work was to see myself, to see who I really am. That, I believe, is the great goal of our work. It seems we have two selves. One self is this unconditioned self. The unconditioned self that we arrive with. The unconditioned self, Mary, that comes trailing clouds of glory and is here to play a part in the world and to live full out. This unconditioned self is our original you. It's us. It's who we are before we started to identify with a body, before we began to learn our name, before we began to think about passports and school credits and dating and calories and cholesterol and mortgages and marriages and divorces and pensions. You know, the story of our life. This is the original you. This unconditioned self is described in the Catholic tradition as your original blessing. This is your original blessing. This is what St. Francis of Assisi called your eternal loveliness. This is your secret beauty. This is your original face. In the Buddhist tradition, there's the great tradition of the original face. This is you. It exists. It's waiting on your recognition and your acceptance. And it's who you really are. There's another self. The other self is what the Greeks called your persona. It's what Freud calls your ego, a sense of a separate self. It's what Western psychology calls your self-image. It's what one USM graduate calls your rubber mask. I learned that today, by the way. The rubber mask that when you take it off reveals the light. And the great drama of our lives is to be able to discern between the unconditioned self and that learned self, that self-image. Our goal is, I believe, to be able to remember who we are. My honest feeling is that most people don't really need more therapy, they just need more clarity. They're not broken, they don't need fixing, they just need clarity. And the clarity comes from remembering who we are. The clarity comes from asking ourselves a question like, what's it like to be me when I'm not judging myself? What's it like to be me when I'm not criticizing myself? What's it like to be me when I'm not trying to make myself into something? What's it like to be me without a self-image? What's it like to be me even without a body? What's it like to be me when I really feel like me? That's our work. That's what we're all about. So what is the goal of therapy? Why do we really visit counselors and psychologists and therapists? I honestly believe the goal is to remember who we are. The goal of the therapist is to uphold the memory of wholeness. Is to be able to say, I appreciate that you may have forgotten who you are and you may have forgotten about your wholeness, but I will be a witness for your wholeness. I will remember that. And I will understand that there are diagnoses and difficulties and things that we're going to work with, but all along I will remember for you your wholeness so that you can remember your wholeness. And by the way, I don't think this is something we do just as therapists. I think we do this also as parents for our children. We do this as lovers. We do this as friends. We remember people's wholeness for them, especially when they can't remember it for themselves. When we forget who we are, we do become neurotic. It's a sign. When we're neurotic, it's a sign we've forgotten, if you like, who we are. And we begin to think that there must be something missing in our lives. We experience what I call that myth of inadequacy. The myth of inadequacy that haunts us. The myth of inadequacy that says that we're not enough. That we're not smart enough. That we're not intelligent enough. That we're not bright enough. That we're not beautiful enough. That we're not successful enough. That we're not inspired enough. That we're not somehow ready. I call this a myth of inadequacy because in my experience, when we forget who we are, that's when we think we're inadequate. And yet, when we remember who we are, we begin to see we are full of everything we thought was missing. The great drama of our lives, I believe, is a drama of authenticity. And I think truly each and every one of us graduates potentially every time we take a more authentic step in our lives. The process of graduation happens on special days like this, but it can happen through our entire life. And the graduation is a process of letting go of that self-image and stepping more into the truth of who we really are, that unconditioned self, the soul nature of who we really are. The drama of authenticity challenges us not to change ourselves, but to change our mind about ourselves. That's what we're called to do. Let's stop changing ourselves. We're not a self-improvement project. It's boring. It's tiring. It doesn't work. Let's remember who we are. Let's accept that we are what we have come to find, that we are what we seek. Our goal, our challenge, always is to dare to be even more of who we really are. And that, I believe, is what we are celebrating today. You took a stand in your life. You said yes to a process that is helping you to be even more of who you are. And because you have done that, you're going to make it so much more possible for all of us to be who we really are. Whenever you think something is missing in your life, remember, it's probably you. So look, to finish, I have a question for you. Are you ready? Are you ready? I really hope so. I really, really hope so. Because I've got some bad news for you. And some good news. The bad news is that little voice that says you're not ready probably hasn't gone away. That little voice that's going, oh my God, I was hoping for another year, at least. That voice, the one that's never quite ready, that voice probably hasn't gone away. What we have to ask ourselves is, who does that voice belong to? When I say I'm not ready, who's saying that? And I will tell you, it's the self-image. And that voice deserves your compassion. But there will be this other voice which belongs to that unconditioned self, the voice that actually encouraged you to come on this program in the first place, because you were really already ready. And that voice will be the one that says, yes, please, you're ready. Show the world who you really are. I'd ask you to remember just one thing, and this is it. The ego is never ready to do the soul's work. That's the bad news. The good news is the ego doesn't have to do the soul's work. The soul will do the soul's work, and the ego is encouraged to take as much of the credit as it would like. So on that note, class of 2014, we are here, I believe, to help the world evolve in the direction of love. We are here to be an answer to each other's prayers. And we are here to be the presence of love. And you quite clearly are that. And I'm most grateful to you for the courageous step and stand that you have taken here today and in your life. God bless you. I love you and thank you.